Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on consultative capture. We've had a tremendous interest in this topic, and we're excited to discuss it. I am Mallory Price and will monitor today's session. Thank you for investing this hour with us and our industry leaders. Also, thank you for the questions many of you submitted when you registered. We put several of these questions out into global capture practitioners around the world to get their input and insights, and some of them you'll hear from today. If you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to submit them in the questions tab of your control panel. Time permitting, we'll get to those during or at the end of the presentation. Slides and the video replay will also be available on our website by tomorrow, so if you would like to see that, you can check there. As a reminder for APMP members, this webinar applies toward your continuing education units for certification. Today, we have 4 practitioners, experts in competing for and winning business, and we're glad they could join us. First up, we have Amy McGeady joining us from Texas. Amy is the Senior Vice President of Strategic Services at Shipley. Amy has held many leadership positions focused on winning business. She owned and managed her own consulting business and led a successful nonprofit organization for many years. Eric Gregory is an executive consultant and industry leader in capture management and business winning. Eric has worked with hundreds of companies and practitioners in a variety of industries and has led large and small pursuit teams on must-win deals. Mark Taylor is also joining us from Shipley, UK, and brings us international expertise and over 25 years of experience working with companies to help them win work. Mark is Managing Director of Shipley Limited. We also have Brad Douglas with us. He is the Executive Vice President of Shipley's Global Services. Brad will also moderate today's webinar. So first up, we wanted to talk about, we're doing this a little bit different, but we wanted to talk about what Shipley is all about. Many people have told us that they thought all we did was training, but actually we do a lot of services and consulting. So some of those services include like business development training, like I mentioned, and certification, proposal management, writing, and response management services. We do end-to-end proposal support and consulting, capture, sales, and pursuit management consulting, business winning process improvement, and of course, we have the professional and career development like these free webinars. We have industry insights, blog posts, business winning tips, and we also have guidebooks and playbooks. So if you ever wanted to know more about Shipley, you can also view our website at shipleywins.com. So without further ado, we will get to our agenda. First up, we'll talk about common capture challenges. We'll move to consultative capture competencies, and then we'll talk about approaches to consultative capture, including leadership and trust, customer engagement, active listening, credibility, and we'll summarize all of that. And if we have some time at the end, we will answer some more of your questions. So Brad, now that I have rambled on and on, I will pass this webinar to you.
Thank you, Mallory, and thanks for getting this all coordinated and organized and teed up for us for your introduction. And thanks to Eric, Mark, and Amy for joining, setting aside time. They bring a wealth of industry information and insight, work with a variety of companies of various sizes and types, so their expertise is really, really important. And this topic is something that, you know, has been on our radar. We did a webinar on capture a little over a year ago, and people wanted to know a little more and expound a little bit. So what we're finding in industry as we talk more and more to business winning, business development, leadership, is that this whole idea of capture and capture planning, capture management is becoming such an important part of how we compete. And some of you joining us today are maybe a little unfamiliar with that term, capture. And so what, in a nutshell, what we mean by capture and capture planning is how do we go about long-term positioning and qualifying business opportunities and put together a strategy, a strategic plan to go win that work. So it's much more than selling. Selling is kind of telling a compelling story, and capture is the whole strategy and teeing up our ability to go compete. Why is this so important? This is what we hear. This is what we hear from industry, is that customers, there's sometimes this lack of trust between the buying organization and the selling organization. They've had maybe bad experiences with providers, vendors, suppliers, and so it leads to some of this dysfunction, if you will. Sometimes we're trying to capture work or sell opportunities, and the customer has no relationship with us, or there's confusion in the marketplace about who owns who, all these mergers and acquisitions going on, poorly communicated expectations, again, between the buying and selling organization. Regulation and politics sometimes get in the way and disrupt our ability to go capture work. We've all experienced high pressure sales and high pressure tactics, and that becomes kind of an issue in the relationship building. Sometimes we hear end customers, maybe it's a government agency, maybe it's a big banking or hospital system. They say that, well, all these vendors and suppliers, they're not responsive. We tell them what we want and they're not responsive to what we ask for. Or the vendor or supplier comes across as know-it-all, arrogant. And so all of these things contribute to, why do we need to address this topic? Why do we need to be more consultative in how we go about positioning for work? And you see a quote here: it takes 20 years to build a reputation for ourselves, our company, our organization, but we can ruin that in 5 minutes if we don't do the right things and behave the right way. And this is the challenge. And Eric's going to expound on this a little bit. Just he's had so much experience with so many different people and organizations. But the challenge is the balance of the tactical and strategic side of what we call capture, this pursuit and capture management, and the interpersonal, some of those leadership type of qualities, the team building, being a motivator. And this is where sometimes organizationally we run into challenges, is we maybe put too much emphasis in who we hire, who we bring into our organization to do this capture management. We put too much emphasis on one side of this balance or the other, too much on the tactical or too much on the interpersonal. So I'm going to ask Eric if he would take a few minutes and talk about 5 key areas that really are what we would call consultative capture competencies that are so vital to success. So Eric, would you walk us through these, please?
Sure. And I just want to mention one thing, that all consultative capture revolves around 3 relatively simple principles that can be defined as the 3 A's, which are ask, analyze, and act. And it all really builds on that. But key to this, number 1, is making sure that we do, in fact, build solid relationships with our customers. And it doesn't matter who your customer is. And when you're selling in a consultative way, you have to remember there's only 2 things. Any entity, whether you're an entity that does government work, commercial work, or nonprofit work, that really has to sell, and that's capability and credibility. And so once you get oriented around that, your discussions with your potential customers change rapidly, because you're in a constant state of where you're trying to define capability and credibility, and convince organizations and customers that you really can do the job. And that can go a long way to building a successful relationship because you're sharing information in a way that makes you and your customer share a joint responsibility in terms of trying to perceive how you're going to achieve a common objective. I think one of my big issues is this whole leadership challenge that we have in Capture. When I look at Capture managers, one of the first things that I assess, and probably the most important thing I assess, is their leadership capability. Because if you can't lead a team, you're not going to be able to accomplish any objective. And leadership really is critical to this whole effort. We probably shouldn't call it Capture management. We should probably call it Capture leadership in terms of trying to achieve those objectives, because managing alone just won't get you there. And so just really study up on your leadership skills, how to lead by example, how to convince people to do things simply and easily. I had a friend of mine one time ask me, he said, you're really good at getting people, to do things that you want them to do. How do you do that? And I said, well, usually I ask please, and then I say thank you. And they got mad at me and stomped off. So leadership is actually a very simple proposition. Customer engagement is critical. You have to talk to them. I don't know what it is about people in Capture management. They forget that consultative means you actually have to talk to people. And you can't just rely on research. You have to understand and assess who you're dealing with as a person and a set of people. And remember, our customers are not one-dimensional. They're multi-dimensional. And we have to touch every aspect of the customer dimensions and the things that we do, because if we don't, we can't come up with a win strategy. And if we can't come up with the actions that are actually going to propel that win strategy forward, our probability of win is only going one way, and that's down. And you have to have trust. You have to have trust with your customers. You have to have trust with your team, and you have to have trust with your executives. And that can be a hard thing to build and maintain. And you've really got to be careful, because you can lose it. I had a high-powered consultant one time, just couldn't understand why I would tell, the president of U.S. operations at CACI certain things. I said, number one, I never lie to my boss. Number two, I have to be credible in terms of making sure that they understand very clearly where we are and how I'm going to move us in the direction we need to go if they're going to trust me and my judgment. And so this devolves into some critical things in terms of basic leadership qualities that we have to have. That idea of creating a vision in terms of where we're going to go and how to get there is really going to make a difference, especially when we're working with our customers, because unless we have a shared vision, we're not going to be able to develop the strategy that's really going to focus on key customer issues, most important requirements, and the value or benefits that will accrue to them if they select us. We have to impel action. Capture is all about action. You have to do stuff that every time you complete an action, you can tell that probability of win has gone up. And it's really critical to set expectations. Set them low, that's what you're going to get. Set them high, you got a good chance of getting a really high-performing team doing the right things at the right time. And we always have to be measuring to see if we're moving forward. Because if we're not moving forward against the objectives and goals that we set for ourselves, we're regressing. And regressing means probability of win is going down. And you have to inspire your teams. I tell executives I can tell if they have a high-performing organization with one question. I ask them how many people are volunteering to be on their capture and proposal efforts. And a lot of times it's none. And we have to inspire people to want to do this for the greater good of the organizations that they happen to be serving. And so we have to pay attention to that. And 90% of all problems on any capture and any proposal effort can be traced back to poor communication. Communication is essential. And then, of course, if we really want to be in a position where we can reward performance. And it's not always with money, it's recognition. We want to make sure that we are, in fact, rewarding our teams with the recognition they deserve for the effort that they've actually put in to make the whole organization successful. And if we can do this, we've demonstrated leadership.
That's great. Thank you, Eric. And Mark, I would ask you, given your experience in so many different industries and teams of different sizes and makeup, do you have any thoughts on these particular qualities that you see that really stand out as being must-haves?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. And well, thanks, Eric. I think you really just covered it there. From my perspective, two quick things. Eric talked there about the term capture manager versus capture leader, and certainly in Europe, capture leader has got a lot of traction. And I think, as Eric said, it captures what we're trying to achieve here. The second thing I want to pick up was what Eric said about advancing and measuring progress. I think that's a real tricky thing to do in capture. I think what I've witnessed is the best teams are where the capture leader creates milestones against which the team can measure themselves, which they buy into. It can be quite challenging because often, when an RFP or an ITT is issued, well, great, that's tangible. But early in capture, it's like, what are the tangible measures of progress? I think that's something for every capture leader to reflect on.
That is a great point, and if we don't have those milestones along the way between, say, key decision gates or things like that, we can get off course too quickly. And so I think being agile in how we go about advancing, tracking, monitoring, you're right on.
And just quickly, Brad, I want to add again to what Eric said. Eric made the point about it's got to be about actions. And every time we define an action, we should also define how will we know that action has worked. So define the action and define at the same time what will we see that will prove it's worked.
Excellent. And again, bringing it back to kind of the title of this webinar, being consultative in how we go about it, not just internal, but external. Thank you both. Great insights into really capture leadership and what that entails. And we talked about trust a little bit earlier as being one of those key competencies, is the ability to establish trust. And here you see a quote from Stephen M.R. Covey. He's the author of a fascinating, fantastic book, and actually a training leadership program called The Speed of Trust. And Amy, I was wondering if you'd talk for a few minutes about what you've seen, experienced in industry and in your own organizations about the importance of trust as it relates to being involved in selling, capturing business. Could you walk us through some of these key points?
Sure. Eric mentioned two critical C's that are part of trust: capability and credibility. Which I guess really point to another C, which is competence. Can you produce the results that you're promising? I would add one more element when it comes to building trust, which is character. So, do you have integrity? Do you say what you're going? Do you do what you say you're going to do? Are you honest and straightforward? Do you own your mistakes? Basically, do you act with good intention? Because I think if you're showing both competence and character, those are the things that really build trust. They build trust with your customers, and we know that people buy from people they trust. Often we're talking about major investments that most of us are working on, and our customers don't want to make those investments with people that they don't think are competent or are of good character, or companies that aren't competent and of good character. And then employees. Employees respond better to leaders they trust. They want to step up to the plate. They want to be part of teams where they know that their leaders have good intentions and are going to lead them to success. And then, some of the things, we talked about a lot of people issues and milestones, et cetera, and that can seem like that's an inefficient process, but actually consultative capture really improves your efficiency and improves your results first. It really helps enhance your thinking. So you're thinking of your team and that collaboration with the customer. It imposes a sort of discipline in your pursuit management that helps you produce better results and gain efficiency. It helps you build consensus both internally with your teaming partners, with partners within your customer organizations. It creates an opportunity and frankly milestones at which you transfer information from sales to pursuit to proposal teams, so that that partnership that you build very early in the process, that there's a way of making sure that teamwork and that collaboration, the information that's been gained, continues to move forward as the opportunity advances. You can identify gaps in your win strategy and your capabilities, and if you're doing that early enough, you can figure out solutions to how are you going to address those gaps. Do you need new partners? Do you need to hire someone with certain skills? Do you need to rethink how you do something? All of this allows you to save money and wasted resources, and then become that trusted advisor to your customer and to your team, and frankly, as Eric mentioned, to your executive leadership.
Thanks, Amy. And I want to re-emphasize one point, and that is in this third box across the top here, this idea of building consensus. It's so important that if we are the lead on a pursuit, on an opportunity, that this consensus building is happening all the time. And you notice in that box, it says internally with our teaming partners also, and with the customer. I think if the global pandemic taught us one thing, it enlightened us about the importance of collaborating and building consensus, and maybe doing that in new and different ways, but doing it in a very consistent way. So to that point, Amy, you mentioned on discipline. Having discipline in our approach is really, really important. And then, yeah, go ahead, please.
On that, and the importance of trust. If you're in a high trust environment, people will tell you if you're not aligned. People will say, I disagree, or I see something different, or hey, we talked about something different, I heard something different. In low trust environments, people will kind of go along to get along, but you're really not building consensus, and there will come a point that comes to a head as you pursue the opportunity.
Yeah, and if we think about this in our own lives, when we're making some kind of major decision or purchase, a home, a car, tires for Eric's truck, whatever it is, we are buying from people and from organizations, and that relationship and that trust is every bit as important, sometimes more important than the product itself, the solution itself. So thanks for that. And so this is just kind of an axiom, if you will. If we want to really have a competitive advantage, we have to think maybe a little differently. It's not just about what we're selling anymore, because there is a lot of imitations, duplications, knockoffs, whatever we want to call it, to where the product and service is very, very difficult to discriminate sometimes. So sometimes how we go about consultative capture, how we build that relationship and trust is our discriminator. Because the product or service is getting so hard sometimes in some industries to really separate ourselves. And so the how we engage, how we work, becomes that discriminator that that is so important. Any thoughts on this, Mark, as we continue to talk about building the relationship?
Yeah, I think you're right, Brad. I think that rightly or wrongly, many services and products now are almost commodities, and that means, exactly as you say, it's the behaviours that we present when we are in capture. The customer prospective customer will be noting that, and they'll be measuring us and thinking, can we work with these people? So I think you're spot on. It's how we engage. Our behaviours are as important, if not sometimes more important, than what we're actually selling.
Okay, thank you. Good. Okay, Eric, I know I've worked with you long enough over the years to know that this is so important to you, and I've heard you facilitate on this and speak about this idea of how, as pursuit leads, capture managers, sales executives, whatever our role, how do we go about uncovering real things that matter to our prospective customer? Would you talk about just this whole notion of trying to be more consultative in how we uncover these hot button issues?
Well, I think there's one thing that really separates, after all of my years of doing this, one thing that really separates great capture leaders from, just okay ones. And I think we all need to aspire to be great capture leaders. And it's a very simple thought. A great capture leader is a synthesizing agent. They have a unique ability to fundamentally assimilate vast amounts of disparate information and make sense of it. And that's a very hard thing to do. You see it in the engineering world in terms of people who are classified as systems engineers. Now, of course, my theory is that all good systems engineers are dead because they're really hard to find nowadays. And the key attribute, again, is that one of a synthesizing agent. And you can apply that to almost any kind of profession where people are really good. And that's critical in terms of capture. Because if you can't synthesize, assimilate, analyze, disparate information and make sense of it, you're never really going to be able to figure out exactly what's important to a customer, what's not important to a customer, what appears to be important, but is not necessarily important. And surprisingly enough, if you're really good at doing this, you become the essential communicator among and between various customer elements, because guess what? They don't talk to each other. And if you have that ability to synthesize information and impart critical information among those various customer constituencies, you just made yourself valuable in a dimension that they absolutely need, which is somebody that actually knows how to work across the various customer elements to get something done. And that falls right back on what you said before on the last slide, because I have a strategy that I use to communicate with customers that takes advantage of this ability to synthesize large amounts of disparate information. And I always sell to them in a way, I never sell a thing. I never sell really a capability. I never really sell, a credibility, even though I am doing that. What I really sell is I want you to have a successful procurement. I want you to have a successful outcome. And when you change that and get focused on that in combination with this ability to synthesize information, and you take a look at these things here like risks, agendas, cost concerns, and bring that all together in a solution that will in fact deliver a successful procurement or outcome for the customer, you've put yourself in a position where if you can back that up with the proper facts and data, you're going to win. It's going to be very hard to beat you. And so that's, Brad, is why I think this is really critical, because if you do this right, you have positioned yourself to be the best communicator with your customer in a consultative way.
Excellent. Thank you. Boy, you're right. I was on a panel once in a conference, industry conference, and one of the panelists made a pretty straightforward comment, very simple, but it stuck with me over the last several years. Is the bidder with the most information and the best information will win. And that goes to what you said, Eric, being able to gather information, various sources, synthesize that. It puts us in the advantage, gives us the advantage in all of these areas, risks and hidden agendas and program requirements and personalities and egos, and the list could go on and on. So right on. And then kind of along with that, this whole idea, and I know we've all heard this before, is we have to diagnose before we prescribe. We can't go out and start pitching our solutions, our products, our companies, our methods, whatever it is, our research or technology, without first diagnosing what the customer even cares about. And Mark, I'm wondering if you, I know you've not only done a ton of capture work and capture training, but you've done your share of even sales training and professional development in those areas. Could you just comment on the importance of making sure we don't skip over the diagnostic piece and just start prescribing and selling?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Well, as you say, you've highlighted the risk there of not diagnosing, not listening. I think the spin I'll put on it is, I think it's classically what I often see is we sometimes create the right solution for the wrong people. And that is that we stay in our comfort zone and we listen to the people that we like to listen to, people that we're comfortable with within the customer. And we end up creating a solution which is perfect for them. But then what often transpires is that they're not the buyers. They might be, for example, the users who we need to listen to, but we need to balance that with what are the needs of the buyers. For example, Eric talked about a successful procurement, and by that, I think he's alluding to the fact that the successful procurement is about the buyers and the users, to use those generic terms, getting what they both want. So I think the first thing I'd say is, in terms of being consultative, it's about identifying who we need to talk to, whether we want to talk to them or not, if you get my drift. And making sure that we are not biasing our solution to the people that we just happen to know. Yeah, that's my observation.
Excellent point. Thank you. All right, so how do we do this? How do we actually go about then when we get a chance to engage with a prospective customer, a stakeholder, an influencer, a financial part of the buyer group? How do we really get into it and engage? Amy, I'm wondering if you'd spend some time on these next few screens talking about some of the ideas, techniques, best practices for really drawing out and engaging in a way that we build that trust that we talked about earlier.
Sure. I mean, one of the first things to do is to be listening more than you talk. That we try to use this ratio of, let the customer talk 70% of the time. We talk about 30% of the time. I've been in many meetings that didn't go as well as they could because we were so focused on our sale and not the customer's success. We came in there armed with all this information, and we couldn't wait to talk about how our solution was so great. Rather than just pausing and listening, we think about kind of like if you go to the doctors or you go to a mechanic, well, the way they know that how to solve the right problem is because they listen to you. They listen to you as the patient or the person bringing in the car, because you may mention something, as you're kind of walking through, well, I'm hearing this kind of rattling noise or whatever. The doctor, or the mechanic is trying to figure out, well, what is causing that rattling noise, rather than just stopping there and trying to solve, okay, let me just, jump right in. I need to listen and find out, well, when else is this happening? Is it when you go around corners? Is it when you're accelerating? Is it when the weather is cold? What's causing this? And the only way to really find that out is by listening. So, and here are some clarifying questions that you can use, thinking through, what's driving this acquisition within your organization? Who or what is impacted by the program? What's your timeline? Frankly, why is that your timeline? How does this affect other organizations? Who are your key stakeholders? Many of us, myself included, now are avid podcast listeners. And one of the things I find really fascinating about listening to podcasts is how they ask questions. One of my favorite podcasters, she often says, say more. So, interjecting that, well, tell me more about whatever. Tell me more about your timeline. Tell me more about your stakeholders and how they're impacted, why they're impacted, frankly, why you care that they're impacted. And just asking some questions and having those kind of up your sleeve before you go into any conversation, so that and you're being very intentional in the information that you're seeking out. And frankly, all of those things, you are gathering information, but you're also inspiring trust, because the more that your customer is getting to tell you about their issues, the more they're trusting that you understand them, you get them, you're going to try to solve their issues. And, as Eric mentioned, you do also do a good job of reflecting that back to them along the way. You're inspiring that trust of, okay, you're going to actually solve the problem I'm trying to solve.
Yeah, and I really like how you compared this to the the medical practice, and even a mechanic is just asking these follow-on questions. How so? It is so good. Just asking a question and moving on to the next one feels so much like a checklist. I'm just here to do my checklist with you, but when we can ask follow on, like you said, and clarifying questions, that's when we demonstrate competence.
Well, and sometimes some just really interesting nuggets of information come out. So like when you ask that, well, how so? Especially if you're talking to more than one person in your customer organization, even their conversation, the person that starts answering your how so, and maybe someone else on their team disagrees with them or has a nuanced twist on that, that's really important to be able to observe those dynamics as well.
Yeah. And both Eric and Mark, I know you both facilitate a lot of training workshops where you've got groups of people around a table in teams and so forth, addressing issues and simulations and things. And I think you'd agree that some of those dynamics that come from this engagement and asking good questions back and forth really starts to build a unifying sense within the team. And we need to do this with our customers, this very thing.
Yeah, may I comment on that, Brad, if you don't mind?
Please, yes.
Real quick. I'd like to allow me to suggest something. If I just connect something that Amy said with something that Eric talked about. Amy talked about asking great questions. And earlier, Eric was talking about selling credibility, I think. And one thing I always think about is, can I ask insightful questions which somehow combine a question with a credibility point? So, for example, I might say, to a customer, we've done some research on integrating generative AI into legacy data systems, and one issue we have found is respecting data permissions. What issues have you found? So I often challenge teams to think about, can they ask insightful questions, like use your IQ, where you ask a great question which not only shows you're interested and want to learn, but also just hints at some competence, some credibility. So I'm just combining there the question technique with a credibility point.
So
that's really
important.
good, Mark, because if you go in and just ask questions that make it look like you haven't really, thought about their concerns or problems from a position of knowledge, they're going to pick up on that real quick.
Yeah, yeah, they do with me.
Well, it's also having some like dialogue with them in that, right? Just, as they give answers, to be able to say, well, have you thought about this? Or, well, we've also observed that. And sometimes you can even have some kind of disagreement depending on where you are, not, an unprofessional disagreement, but like, oh, I've seen this other thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm.
And that can just really, as you said, increase your credibility, but also, gosh, you just get such great information out of that.
Well, just remember, Amy, to go back to what I was saying, I always try and present to a customer from a position of I want them to have a successful procurement, which opens up the opportunity to have a different point of view that I think will help them and try and keep them from maybe doing something that's not going to work.
Yep, I agree wholeheartedly.
So this is what separates the tactical, checklist-driven capture manager, sales executive, business developer from the consultative, effective capture manager, sales executive. I think this is really, really key. We talked about all the leadership traits and all that. That is vital. When we actually start engaging with prospective customers and stakeholders, this whole art, and I call it an art for a reason, of being able to ask effective questions, follow up, and drill down is where we really gain that credibility we've been talking about. So I love the discussion back and forth on this topic, because this is where when we're hiring, if we're in a position of hiring capture managers, sales executives, customer success, whatever we call them, sales architects, whoever's going to be interfacing with that customer, we better be looking for this skill set. And we better be, in our interviewing and selection and recruiting process, we better be figuring out if those people know how to do this. Because this is what differentiates us going to market and winning more work and improving our probability of win and win rates and all that. This is key. This is really, really a big key. I love asking the question, when it's appropriate, why haven't you done this before? Why haven't you implemented a CRM system before? And it opens up all kinds of, excuses and roadblocks and personnel, whatever, but think through really good questions. And here you see some things we ought to always be thinking about. Now, these next few screens, I'm just gonna, maybe you'll want to screenshot them, or we post these on the website, but these are just actual examples of types of questions. And we don't have time in this webinar to go into, the art of asking questions to be more consultative, but you want to ask some questions just to gather facts. It's factual questions. You want to ask those input questions. What do you think about needs? Can you tell me what you're looking for? Directional questions, satisfaction questions. What about your current solution? What about your current provider? Tell me about that experience. How's that been? So these are types of discovery, diagnostic questions that we need to be prepared with. These don't always come to mind unless we actually prepare and practice and think about what we're going to ask when we're given the opportunity. Concerns, opportunity questions. What concerns you about understanding questions. What is so-and-so's role in this evaluation process? Expectations. Wouldn't it be nice to know what a customer expects in a past performance volume? If we have a chance to engage them up front, pre-tender, pre-solicitation, and have a discussion, what will you be anticipating in XYZ volume or section, do you think, of a solicitation? Maybe they're not going to say, maybe they don't know, but it might get them thinking. So types of discovery questions just to be thinking about. And again, you can go back and review some of these, but I would encourage everyone, for the sake of being prepared, being more consultative in our approach, think about this. Think about how good are we at really peeling that onion back and asking really good questions. And then Amy, you mentioned this earlier, and so just I'm going to give you a chance to dwell a little more on this, the art of listening and what it means to be an active listener. You want to comment on this for a bit?
Sure. And I think here at active is really the key word, and it's about being really present in the moment. It can be so tempting to have your list of questions and you're thinking about what you're going to say next, rather than being really present to the moment of what's happening. Because when you're really present and you're listening actively, there's different things, like the things on this slide. You can really hear the what, the how, the why in a message. You can figure out where are the real points that you need to have follow-up, because there might be a hot button issue kind of lingering in what the person is saying, but it's kind of hidden in there. Asking for clarification when you don't understand something, because if you try to cover that up, you're missing this huge opportunity to really have a greater understanding. And then sometimes, one active listening technique is really just repeating what you heard, not trying to over explain it, but just clarifying, hey, did I hear you correctly? You mentioned that, whatever the issue is, you mentioned that, you're really concerned about the transition time because you had a bad experience with that before. Can you tell me a little bit more? So I just think that being really present, kind of going with the flow of the conversation so that you can key in on some of the critical parts of the conversation that frankly aren't about you.
Excellent. This is so important. I think over time we've become lousy listeners, to be honest. There's so many distractions, multitasking. We're on meetings or calls or virtual sessions, and we're not actively listening. We're multitasking, and so being a good listener, being present, excellent. Thank you. So before we move on, and a lot of what we've talked about, as Mallory said, were ideas and thoughts and responses to some of your questions you submitted when you registered. Mark, I'm gonna point this to you. There were a lot of registrants that ask questions about how to gain access. How do we get access to influencers or stakeholders? What are some ways to get past the gatekeeper and really get to people that matter during this capture cycle? Could you have one or two nuggets for us there?
How long have I got? So, okay, what do I think? The first thing I'll say is, and Brad, you used the term there, to get past the gatekeeper, and I know that the sentiment you're getting at there. The first thing I'd say to people is make friends with the gatekeeper. Make friends with the gatekeeper, because if they truly are a gatekeeper, they're your best way of getting to whoever you want to get to. So the number one, just find out who those gatekeepers are and make it your business to make friends with them and to respect them. And because if you convince them, they will introduce you to the people who you want to talk to. If you convince those gatekeepers that you've got something of value to talk about, for example, telling them the sorts of questions you want to ask or you'd like to ask. So my one thing would be to say to treat those gatekeepers as gate openers, maybe. Yeah, that's my comment, Brad.
No, that's great. And Eric, in the government space, that could be the contracting officer, right? I mean, establish a relationship there and try to build on that.
Well, and the other thing too is you just have to use different channels than we used to. You used to be able to, schedule meetings and things like that. It's very difficult when people are working remote. I mean, that really kind of now you really have to pay close attention to making sure that that you attend industry events where you have a reasonable chance of contacting the people you really want to talk to, because it just is becoming more and more difficult every day to get an appointment. And so the communication is much less formal now, but still critically important.
Yeah. Well, in the respecting everyone's time, we've talked a lot about credibility and establishing credibility and trust. So I'm going to click through this rather quickly because this is really more summary. But this idea of we want credibility with the customer and customer organization, of course. And here are some thoughts on that. And again, we've covered most of this. Collaborate, mutually explore, think about the benefits, communicate early and often. Very important with the customer. And then there's this whole idea of establishing, as Eric talked about on the leadership side, that internal team credibility. And we talked about focusing on our probability of win, holding people accountable, being accountable ourselves, not passing the buck and making sure we're the one accountable. So that credibility factor, internal and external, is just so important as we try to be more consultative in how we go about competing for work. The other thing we'd mention here quickly is this idea of what can we do if we are capture managers, sales leads, sales execs, what can we do to add value? What can we help the customer, the client organization with? We can provide them insights. If there's white papers we come across, studies, we can provide them and share those. We can help bring clarity. Amy mentioned this a lot. Be present. Events, conferences, industry day, networking. What's the politics behind some of the opportunities we might be pursuing? That's how we have to just stay connected. We have to be seen as someone who's adding value. Back to what Eric said, how are we going to add value to make sure this procurement is successful for them? And these are some ideas in doing that we've already talked about. And I just want to make sure we don't ignore some of the technology means that we have to stay connected. You'll see this quote up here from a strategic podcast recently. Strategic use of social media comes down to providing compelling content and engaging with key influences and decision makers who can enhance business growth. So I know some are afraid of some of these channels, but sometimes our customers prefer channels like that to engage with us. And then with the up and coming, we've alluded to it a few times, artificial intelligence, the chat GPTs and all the others, that can definitely play a part in us being consultative because it helps us research. It helps us find information and brainstorm ideas. But there's a whole lot of cautions that we put out there as well. And these are pretty self-explanatory. We just need to make sure any information we glean from any source is vetted and validated, and that we don't get overzealous and reckless with information that's coming to us from some of the artificial intelligence platforms that are available to us. So certainly beneficial, but also some cautions. And then Amy, I'm wondering if you would just take a moment. There's kind of these 6 focus areas when we think about being consultative in our capture work. Would you just kind of summarize these 6 areas for us?
Sure. I think, we always want to make ourselves the easiest choice. And so, there's always going to be certain areas that any buyer is going to be thinking about. They're going to be thinking about cost, ease, both how easy it is to buy from you or buy from you and to operate with you. That emotional appeal, like, have you demonstrated like that? We all want that feeling of I'm understood, I'm going to be taken care of. That, Mark referenced, sometimes you can have the right solution, but the wrong person. So you want to make sure that we're solving the right problem, that we've demonstrated an ability to perform, that we've talked through the quality, reliability, and capabilities of our service, of our product, and then think through the issue of support. How much support are we able to offer and how dependable will we be? So I think if you focus on these 6 areas, you're making it really easy for a customer to select you and to do so with confidence.
Hey, Brad, if you're talking, we can't hear you. I think you might be on mute.
I'm sorry. You saw there just kind of a summary of the customer journey that that we need to take with them, and we need to be aware of the politics, the egos, and the personalities. But in summary, the things we've talked about, we need to be able to balance the tactical and strategic with the interpersonal. It's tricky, and if we're in a hiring mode looking for these kind of people, though, that's the balance we're looking for. We need to prepare and ask meaningful questions, active listening, diagnose before we prescribe. How can we create value? How can we best engage and focus on that relationship building? So to the panelists, Eric, Mark, Amy, Mallory, thank you all for joining us. We invite those any of you to join future webinars. We tried our best to address most of your questions that you submitted early during the webinar. I'm sorry we didn't have time to address some here on the back end, but please, I hope you'll keep joining us. And Mallory, are there any burning questions? Maybe we have time for one question before we all jump off.
Honestly, we have pretty well answered all of them just over the course of the webinar.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and hope to have you join us again soon. Take care.